Good morning, everyone, and we are glad to see you. We appreciate you coming to our session. And this is a joint session of the Domain Repositories Interest Group and the Repository Platforms for Research Data Interest Group. And the title of our session is Data Repositories Discovering Unpublished and Diverse Data Usage and Impact. And the session organizers are myself, Bob Downs, Kirsten Leonard, she's up here up front. Kirsten is from the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory at Columbia. We have also another organizer is Lily Zhang from the Chinese Academy of Science. She's back there taking notes for us. And Devin Ray Donaldson here from the Luddy School of Informatics, Computing and Engineering at Indiana University, Bloomington. So I'm going to quickly introduce what we're doing and then we'll get on our way. Hopefully. See how that works. Yes. So the Repository Platforms for Research Data Interest Group is led by Lily Zhang, Devin Ray Donaldson, and myself. And you can see our previous chairs there. And the Domain Repositories Interest Group is led by Kirsten Leonard here, and that's a previous chair. Just so that you know what these interest groups are about. The Repository Platforms for Research Data Interest Group is trying to improve the usability and technical capabilities of repository platforms. And the Domain Repositories Interest Group is looking for shared interest in data curation, dissemination, preservation, and institutional sustainability. And this interest group will provide a forum for sharing practical experience and developing joint projects. So our session agenda is first, we're going to have Leticia Bracco and Patrice Lopez. Are they here? Oh, great. Fantastic. And next, Elizabeth Moss, who will be presenting online. After that, we'll have Maria Esteva here, and then Kirsten, and then that'll be followed by me. And then we're going to have a discussion after that. What we would like you to do, though, while we're having all of these discussions or talks, just think about these questions and think about any new questions that we might want to have a discussion about during the discussion period. We'll have 20 minutes or so at the end for an in-depth discussion. But these are things to think about initially, at least. And without further ado, let's see what happens. Maybe we'll get the next one. Okay. Okay, can we have the next talk, please? Oh, great. Okay. So this is Leticia Bracco and Patrice Lopez.
Thank you. So I'm Patrice. So I'm going to talk about the French Open Science Monitor, and more particularly how we try to extend it to cover software and research datasets. So the French Open Science Monitor started in 2018 together with the French National Plan for Open Science, which is a large program which has funded plenty of projects in France to promote every aspect of open science in the country. And given the number of projects, there was a need to follow the effects of these projects and more generally to understand how open science is evolving in the country. So that's why we started to develop the monitor. And the monitor is based on a couple of main principles. So the first one was no proprietary databases. So no Scopus, no Web of Science for a question of sovereignty. We use only open databases. So the problem is that it's not enough. Open metadata doesn't have enough affiliation information and enough domain information. So that's why we had to complement metadata, open metadata, with harvesting, large-scale harvesting of landing page to extract more affiliation strings, and with machine learning to detect country information, French affiliation, and also to predict the domain of the publications. Another principle is that everything is open source, including what we are developing. Another requirement is that everything should be regularly updated. The monitor has to be fresh so that we can adapt the open science policy year after year. What's concretely the monitor is a set of dashboards and indicators which try to capture the objective of the National Plan for Open Science, French one. And what we try to do is to have something that is easy to understand by the public. So, for instance, our main indicator is the following one. It's simply the ratio of publication available in open access given all the publication in France. So here, French publication means a publication with an author, at least one author with a French affiliation. And we see that it's growing. In 2022, we reach 27%, yes. And you can see that it's quite simple. And in 2030, the idea is to reach 100%, which is the objective of the Open Science Plan. So very clear, very simple. This is the 5th version of the monitor. And what's interesting is that every year we will compute everything, all the corpus and all the state of the publications, so that we take into account retrospectively the publication that might be going into open access a few years after or with embargo. We have a view on disciplines, which is interesting because well, we can identify what to prioritize. So which field is more open or less. We have a view on clinical trials, but I'm going quickly. And a view on PhD thesis, if it's open access or not. What's interesting also is that there is a set of tools in the national monitor to create for a local organization, a local repository, a local monitor for having its own open science indicators. So a lot of institutions and universities in France have created and exposed their own monitor like that. So of course, as you know, this was just about publication, and science is much more than publication. So we try to extend it to research data sets and software. And of course, it's much more complicated. So first, data set and software appears only in the publication as informal mention in the text body of the articles. If we looked at software, given a few analyses, we can see that only 1 to 8% of the mentions are formal references, which means there is an entry in the reference section for the software. So it's not common. And PID are almost not used at all for software. For research data set, we have more PID, but most of the time we have something which is just which is unnamed, and we just have a generic name in a sentence like this one. The data has been collected, so we know there's some data that has been created, but that's it. We try to use data repositories via DataCite first to create some indicators, but so far we were unable to create meaningful indicators with just repositories. Of course, first, it covers mainly what is shared, so it doesn't give any information about what's not shared. But also the metadata are really poor and not consistent. So there are not enough affiliation information. And when affiliations are available, it's very low quality. And so there's no general domain information, which makes it difficult to create useful indicators. We also had granularity issues. So sometimes one data set with 10,000 images is going to have 10,000 DOI at file level, all with type data set. And actually, it's hard to manage this sort of scale effect. Also, we observe that the deposit of datasets in repositories is not really correlated with the actual production. So for instance, we had this example of a French data repository with 10,000 datasets in 2020. And the next year, there were just a couple of ones because they were catching up with the past. So we have a very erratic activity, actually. It is not the real research production. So we thought that, okay, it's necessary to link the data sets to real research work. And also, so that's why we use as a methodology the publications as proxy to do text mining in order to be able to understand the usage and the creation of dataset and software. And this way, it's possible to rely on higher quality metadata, which are the metadata of the document. So very quickly, we use a set of tools for doing text mining of the publications. First, we use Grobid. So I'm the developer of Grobid, to extract the full text, import the structure full text from the articles. And also we can detect with high reliability, for instance, dataability sections, which are very useful. For detecting dataset mentions, we use a tool called Datastet. I'm also the author of Datastet. Which is based on the DataSeer project, which was funded by the Sloan Foundation. And it's trained on 22,000 manually annotated sentences. It's a deep learning approach. And it produced something like that, like you can see. So it finds mention of dataset together with some attributes like the URL and identifier. For detecting software mentions, we use a tool called SoftSite, which is also based on a project 6 years ago, which I started 6 years ago, funded by the Sloan and More Foundation, and now by the French Open Science Plan. And this one is trained on almost 5,000 manually annotated documents. It was a huge work, 37 annotators during 2 years. It was really, really hard. And again, we can find mentions of software within the publication, and also, for instance, together the bibliographical references corresponding to the extracted mentions. We can also disambiguate against Wikidata for known software and this sort of thing. We also develop a set of classifiers to characterize the context of the mentions. So is the dataset or software used in the research work that is described? Is it created? Is it shared? And once again, it's trained on thousands of examples. Coming back to the monitor, yeah, I'm going fast. Yes, coming back to the monitor, the corpus for the last 10 years correspond to more than, or to approximately 1.5 million papers, articles. We have been able to download the full text for 2/3 of them, covering both open access and closed access papers. Thank you. We extracted millions of mentions, and we can produce indicator dashboard like this one. So here it's the ratio of publication mentioning the use of data. And we can see that today, most of the papers are using data. Here, it's a kind of funnel approach. For the publications that are using data, which one are producing data? And here you can see well, we reach currently 1/3. And here, given the papers that are producing data, which one are sharing the data? So that's typically what we want to maximize in an open science approach. And we can see that there's really room for improvement. And we can do this, and we have the same for software. You can go to the website of the French Open Science Monitor. There are all these dashboards. There's also a very long preprint that explain all the models and evaluate everything. And 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Patrice. Do we have any immediate questions for Patrice? Perhaps a quick question? Yes, please, go ahead, Christophe.
Yeah, currently it's static things that is produced at the end of the year for the previous year. So yes, it's 1 time per year currently.
Well, great, thank you very much, Patrice. Our next speaker is Elizabeth Moss, who will be presenting remotely. And Elizabeth is the librarian and lead of the bibliography of data-related literature at ICPSR, the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research. Elizabeth's going to talk about challenges in tracking research data impact, how researchers talk about and cite data in the social science literature. Are you with us, Elizabeth?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. Please go ahead. Welcome.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I wish I could be there in person. So whenever the slides appear, I don't see them. Great. I'm not sure if I'll be advancing, but or if you will. So yes, thank you for that introduction, Bob. I'm happy to be here. I'm going to be talking about my repository, ICPSR, and what we do to track data and what challenges we're encountering. And I'll talk a little bit about a couple of publications, a poster and a publication that talks a little bit more about what we're finding in the way of data citation and reference in the literature. I'm not sure how to advance the slides. I'm sorry.
Please. Thank you.
Thank you. So yes, you can go ahead and advance. I'm just going to be talking about our archive a little bit, the bibliography of data-related literature, the challenge we've encountered, tracking data's impact, our DOI citation use discovery when we had a little natural experiment with the social science literature, and then the questions and implications about those. So you can advance the slide, please. So this is the first agenda item. Go ahead and advance. So this is a bit about ICPSR. It's been around for 60 some years. It's a domain repository for the social and behavioral health sciences. What we distribute are data sets shared by researchers, individuals, all the way up to federal data archives that have their data with us. And what we distribute are studies which have data sets, documentation for use with those data sets to understand them, and rich metadata to describe and give context to the data sets. And one of the bits of metadata that we provide are the data-related publications that we've found that analyze the data in those studies. So I'll be referring to these things as studies or data. And then just a little bit more about how we're funded. We have both membership and that dues that help us sustain over time, plus soft money, grants and contracts. And those federal agencies and private foundations help fund what I do. Next slide, please. And that is down there, the highlighted thing. This is a little record that I thought was fun because it's a random collection in our database, in the study database about Austrian data. But you can go ahead and advance the slide. I just want to point out that what we do is have freely available citations database. And that's what I work on with a team of 4 other people. Advance the slide, please. So what we try to do with the citations database, which has over 110,000 linked citations between our studies and the publications that use data from our studies, is we link people out to the full text and we link them directly into the study so that they can access the data if they're interested in it. And it's meant to really help people discover data via the literature. And also when we collect them all together, we help you understand a little bit more about the value or utility of the data if you can see a lot of people are using it. And maybe if you measure impact by citation counts, that's helpful as well. Advance the slide, please. So this is, if you were to go to our website, this is the bibliographies portal page. If you want to learn more about the bibliography that I don't have time to talk about here, this is where I would send you. But I'm going to just do a query in our website to search the collections on the term vaping. And advance the slide, please. And this would get me a results page that would show you that we have results in our studies database, our variables database, and the circled thing is our data-related publications. And just to show you, the big red arrow down there shows that I got, that's the first of the 63 hits I got, and that's the publication linking you out to the full text and linking you in if you're interested, you've discovered data because you found something talked about that you want to follow up on. And there you have the population assessment of tobacco and health study, the PATH study. So click next slide, please. And this will tell you that we also collect the full complement of publications we've been able to find that utilize this study. And that's our attempt to create the universe or a whole bibliography for each of our studies, which is really pretty impossible because we have 12,000 studies and 5 people working on this, but that's our goal. Next slide, please. So the next thing I want to talk about is the challenge of tracking this research data impact. Go ahead and next slide, please. This is just to set the stage. It's a bit of this is a paper I wanted to talk about that my co-authors and I published in April in the Data Science Journal. It was our attempt to sort of define a typology to capture the ways that social scientists refer to data. And it shows kind of the sheer variety of roles data reference can play in an article. And it makes it sort of challenging to do large scale analysis of data citations. Anyway, next slide, please. This is sort of the result of our work. This was our code book that we eventually made into the typology. It's showing you what we went sentence by sentence, every sentence that contained a data entity. We coded it by its various features, its location in the article, the action it was doing, if it was trying to provide access in some way, et cetera. So next slide, please. And these were the main functions that we determined were going on in social science literature. Critiquing, describing, illustrating, interacting with it, in that one instance, interpreting or manipulating or analyzing it, legitimizing it in some way, the paper in some way. So that's all is to say there's a lot going on in the social science literature when it comes to referencing data. Next slide, please. So what I do every day is go on the literature, and I'm very familiar with all that stuff that's going on. My team and I are looking for one type of activity in the publications, and that's analysis, and that's what we put in the bibliography. Any other publications we find, we don't collect. And so there's a lot of manual disambiguation that has to take place to determine if our query hits in a publication are actually use that we collect. Also, manual searching for, as I mentioned, for a collection this size is pretty impossible. And so we're turning a little bit to API querying so that we can get at least a more comprehensive look at our full collection by sending out a query for all of our studies at once. Next slide, please. And just another challenge I wanted to mention is that there's just no single source for the publications that use our data. So we get depositors send us publications at the time they deposit the data. Some people who reuse the data send us their citations, but the vast majority of the work happens when we go out and query databases like these main sources here to look for publications. And I want to talk about a minute, one of our main sources is Dimensions Plus, a digital science platform product. And next slide, please. So I want to talk about what we found as sort of a natural experiment with an API about how people are using DOIs to cite our data. Yeah, so we sent out a query of all of our studies at once with 3 different types of queries: our study names, our study numbers, and our DOIs. And that was in, again, this big corpus of full text in the Dimensions API. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to focus on what we found with the DOI hits. We got thousands of hits, and the ones that we got back for the DOIs, we found as we went through and verified whether they analyzed data that only about 1/3 of them we could collect. And so this was sort of an interesting experiment that we stumbled upon. We wanted to check and see what people were citing if they weren't citing data analysis. Why were they using our DOI? Next slide, please. So we put them all in the 3 buckets, and next slide, please. There's 3 different sort of sections of, this is a poster that we created a year or so ago. There's 3 sort of types of things that people are citing with the DOI that is not analysis. And one is just a source mentioned somewhere in the article where they recommend, for whatever reason, that you look at a different source, and they use our DOI for that. Next slide, please. Sometimes they'll just mention data in passing in the lit review or a brief stat. They don't really say how they came to that stat. Could be from a report. They could have actually downloaded the data and come up with it themselves, but it has nothing to do with the main analysis that's occurring in the article, so we don't collect it. Next slide, please. Sometimes they'll be inspired by the methodology that was used in a study, or they'll take a few questions of a measure from an instrument and reuse those. Or anyway, those are all things that are not actual analysis from their article, so we don't collect it. Obviously, those are interesting things to know about, but those are not analysis, so we don't collect it. Next slide, please. So this has some implications and just a few questions I came to mind when thinking about this, because it provides an opportunity to see that there's a wide array of social science, activity that is done to support research beyond analysis. Next slide, please. And so this is just, can we make things like survey instruments and code books, citable with those individual files citable? Is file level citation with DOI is something that would make authors' lives easier or more difficult? Obviously, we need to make things more clear if we want people to cite in a particular way. Next slide, please. And I was just thinking from a repository's perspective, we have a lot of stakeholders, and who would it be beneficial to see who gets value from seeing analysis, or who would think these other types of uses would be interesting to see? And I think I'm sort of concluding that it might be very interesting for some of our stakeholders to see all the types, but disambiguated, so that they can see analysis separate from the other types of use. Next slide, please. So can we accommodate as repositories, as the whole data infrastructure, this kind of a need? Certainly we know the open global data citation corpus is being built, and machine learning is going to help maybe bring together in one place the references people make to data. But are we going to be able to disambiguate those uses when a data DOI is found? Is it actually, can we tell how it's interacting in that article with the data? Can we disambiguate uses? And that's what rhetorical question I'll leave you with. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to have to move on quickly to our next speaker. Maria Esteva is a research scientist at the Texas Advanced Computing Center. Maria's talk is Implementing and Analyzing Make Your Data Count Metrics, Challenges and Opportunities. Please go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Design Safe is an NSF-funded cyber infrastructure for natural hazards research, connecting data to storage and tools in a high-performance computing environment. In Design Safe, engineers and social scientists can manage, analyze, curate, publish, and reuse data sets in the cloud to study the impacts of diverse types of natural hazards in humans and in the built environment. Design Safe has a core Trust Seal certified repository component with a Fedora backend. Because of its complex architecture, Make Data Count metrics were implemented here from scratch. And of course, implementation had its challenges. First, we had to clearly understand the definitions of the Make Data Count metrics, which are there in orange. Then we had to match the metrics to the actions that users conduct in the web platform, so we could log them and count them properly. For purposes of normalization, some Make Data Count metrics have to be implemented per user session of 1 hour, which means that all user actions during that hour for a specific user are counted as one. This allows comparing usage of data sets that have hundreds of files with those that have a few ones. Once a month, For now, we format the usage information and send it to DataCite through their API. And we also harvest from them views and downloads for each DOI data set. We also send and receive citation information, but we are not talking about that today. Today, we are talking about usage. We store the information locally in a database because we use it for reporting and for statistics. Finally, we have to communicate metrics with clarity to users. What do users understand when we communicate usage? What do views and downloads mean to them? We want to communicate usage clearly, and we are conducting a user testing of a new metrics model or more details in which we provide more information about usage, including the correspondence between views and downloads to make data count metrics and their definitions. And we present metrics in relation to time, so users can see the evolution of usage. And this is done by other repositories, and it's also done by papers, proceedings, etc. So we are expecting the results of this evaluation of this usage study to introduce changes in the model. So it is important for repositories to understand how their data is being used and when, and to interpret the results in context with number of publications, in our case, natural hazard events, and community research practices. Because we have metadata, we can aggregate usage data, slice it and dice it in relation to data types, natural hazard types, or scientific domain. In the examples that I will feature here today, we use the unique request metric because it is the closest to suggesting that users have come in contact with the content of the data. And we slice it per data type, just for brief example. So we follow, for example, in this case, unique requests of data sets published after Make Data Count was finally implemented in January of 2022 per data type. To the right, we see number of publications for that same period, and we see an upward trend in the number of publications for all data types, albeit differences between different types of data. To the left, it is interesting to note differences in usage between, for example, field research data and experimental data, which have a similar number of publications. Usage growth in experimental data remains relatively low in relation to other data types and plateaus, while field research data shows spikes. Those spikes are related to usage of publications of noticeable earthquake events in Mexico and Turkey. Field research data is urgent, and those early data reports are very appealing to our community. Instead, experimental data, which is mostly used to validate numerical simulation, needs more planning and considerations in order to be used. So it's interesting to learn and understand all of these patterns. We are also exploring benchmarking. Benchmarking is an attempt to define levels of usage after publication based on unique request data of all other data sets published around the same time. We have to have a cohort. So we consider here the 81 data sets published between January and June of 2022 and compile the unique requests for each data set in the 12 months following publications. This is a histogram of unique requests of these 81 data sets. The histogram is color-coded based on value around the median, with low, medium, high, very high, and outliers in orange. Most of the data sets experience less than 20 unique requests, with a median across all data sets of 13 unique requests. But there's clearly a long tail of data sets with more than 40 unique requests. These data sets with very high and outlier categories of usage are unique multidisciplinary data sets, reconnaissance reports like the ones in Mexico that I told you. After a natural hazard event, or other data sets with broad appeal. For example, the research that derived from the most used, the most outlier, highest, was featured in the New York Times twice, and the data was visited at that time. Because usage changes over time, we will continue, this is an exploration, okay, to monitor this benchmark of unique requests for the 12 months following publications to see if the distribution remains the same or shifts over time. What I want to highlight here is that these benchmarks are based on our data. They are not comparing with other repositories. It's very contextual. So I'm going to finish here. After almost 2 years of gathering Make Data Count metrics, we plan to continue assessing this analysis to see what changes and implement more analysis. We want to really see how stable these analyses are and you know, how sound they are, of course. We see that usage and publication numbers are rising, and we want to understand trends, correlations, as well as discover patterns of usage across time. So for example, does usage plateau over time? Does it disappear over time? Does usage get very close to the time of publication? And for what type of data? We use these metrics for reporting to stakeholders and users, as you saw, but also to improve services, target training, and outreach. Usage studies are also important to tame expectations about use. You know, we are observing that, for example, simulation data is the least used, unless the data set was created specifically as a test bed, specifically as a data set to be used. Simulations are low on publications, simulation researchers, because they mostly use experimental data, and the simulation, the typical simulation is used less than other types of publications. So it's important to tame the expectations about why is my data not being used, and you know what level of usage it has. We think that it's important to give this contextual information to users and to stakeholders as well. But more importantly, we notice more and more interest of the users about this information. I conduct office hours twice a week, and I am impressed at how much people are interested now in learning, okay, what does this mean? I just saw your model, and they give presentations and they say, oh, my data set was used and was viewed. So it's becoming more and more important. This is, of course, an observation, no, of my community. So I hope that this was interesting to you, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria. Do we have any quick questions for Maria? I see a hand in the back there. Yeah, I guess you have to move forward. Sorry.
Hi, thank you very much. I have a question on the usage stats. We have a repository ourselves, and I think one issue that could appear is that certain data sets are viewed by the people who curate the data set, or are shown, especially at a conference or when you show the repository to someone. So how do you filter out this kind of usage, which is probably especially important for the ones that are only viewed like 3 or 4 or 5 times? How do you filter that this is not done by yourself or by your colleagues?
It is something that is a reality. And sometimes we hear, and some, you know, in discussions, they say, I am the most user of the data because of my data, because I have it, I know where it is now, I don't have to find it somewhere, and I use it. And that is something that we have to grasp, and it is usage. I just read a paper recently about, you know, all these discussions, what is usage? What is pure usage? Usage is usage. So that's why we want to look into the trends, and that's why we are trying to conduct a clustering analysis, but we don't have it ready. So to see if there are trends, you know, if it's true, after publication things get used because they use it at a conference and then it fades. but we are seeing so many variables that we don't know yet. But it's a valid question, of course.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, please go ahead. Yes, please.
Hi, so yes, we have a repository at NIST as well. And so I think this is really valuable, and we're seeing more and more interest from users and stakeholders in understanding usage. So I think it's interesting how you're looking at the 1 year since publication. And in our particular repository, not all of our data publications are static. Some of them are dynamically changing. So I was just curious if you're looking at 1 year of usage after something's changed, or from initial publication, or how you're handling.
So
yeah.
this 1 year, this is because we finished implementing make data. So now we are counting make data count usage, and we finished implementing make data count almost 2 years ago. So it depends. For this cohort, we need things that you cannot compare something that was published, 3 years ago usage with something that was published 2 days ago. So we have to, in order to experiment and assess these metrics, time is of essence. So this is why for different studies, we use time in different ways. We are hoping that with more years of usage, we can understand better the patterns. This is presented this way because we just have only almost 2 years of data.
Okay, thank you.
But it's true what you say, and then we will have to see what happens with versions, etc. So it's very complex, but yes.
Well, thank you very much, Maria. Our next speaker is Kirsten Leonard, and she is a Daugherty Senior Research Scientist, Marine and Polar Geophysics at Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory in the Columbia Climate School of Columbia University. And Kirsten will talk about optimizing commemoration. Oh, you're right. Tracking reuse of geochemical data. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Bob, and thanks for joining the session. I think I'm bringing a bit of a different perspective as a very small repository with a small user community and a small budget. So obviously, we're also trying to track the usage of our systems, but with very limited resources. Next slide, please. Can I get the next slide? Oh, I need to click. Oh, I thought everybody was saying. Okay, sorry for that. So what I'm talking about are two complementary systems. EarthChem is funded by the National Science Foundation in the US and holds geochemical data for terrestrial rocks and minerals and other materials. The other one is the Astromaterials data system funded by NASA that holds composition of extraterrestrial materials. The difference between the two systems is that EarthChem has been around for over 20 years now, and Astromat just in the last few years really got into operation. So we have very little information about the use of and the adoption of the system yet. And the focus of both systems is on laboratory analytical data on samples. And they really focusing on supporting researchers in sharing their data and samples, reusing the data, but also to comply with policies of funders, that specifically with new policies that have been implemented, sorry, at NASA in recent years. So these systems consist of two different components. One is a repository for sample and for data and sample metadata. That's the EarthChem library and the Astromaterials data archive. The other component is a synthesis database that each one of these systems has, where the data that are submitted to us get integrated into fully harmonized data sets. So we get data submitted from researchers that is curated following a very comprehensive workflow of review and accessing. And then they get into these synthesis databases that are augmented by literature data that is published, but is not in our repository. And then we provide a lot of different interfaces to allow both humans and machines to access the data. We have our usual landing pages and searches through the metadata catalog. We also make our metadata available through schema.org for machine readability. And then these synthesis databases have really complex search interfaces that allow people to extract data from any number of data sets that is combined in this. And this creates data sets that sometimes come from hundreds, even thousands of publications that are integrated into these databases, which generates some of the challenges for tracking reuse. And then we have recently implemented APIs that allow people to use their own code, their own software to access these synthesis databases. So for us, we really see three reasons to track the reuse. One is to clearly demonstrate the value, the return of investment for funders and for the general public. And this is essential for us to remain funded and remain sustainable in the world of soft money support for these data systems. But we also want to encourage researchers to share their data by providing them with metrics that demonstrate their data has been reused and has had an impact. The other aspect actually is to also showcase through demonstrating the reuse, how have data been reused? What are the publications that point back to the data and show, hey, this is something that you can do as well, and create new ideas, I think. So I'm kind of categorizing the ways we do track reuse into the easy one, which is just tracking downloads. And we don't have a process yet of really filtering out enough of duplications of users or the good stuff that, you know, Maria has talked about and other speakers as well. I'd love to do that, but with the resources we have and the number of downloads, which are in the range of 300 per month, it's not really feasible to go that way. The challenge with just tracking downloads obviously is that we get limited information about our users, and especially as we do not require authentication for people to download. And this points to this controversial discussion that is still going on. Should people be required to authenticate in order for the repository to get more information about the usage? What we do is a mini survey where we at least ask, are you using the data for research, for education, for commercial use? Also, downloads, in my view, doesn't tell us much about impact. Somebody can download a data set many times, but has new science come out of that? What is really the, how has it been driving discovery forward that the data was reused? And, you know, this goes back into citations as well. Is this just the data just used for comparison and so on, or was it actually critical for achieving the outcome of a research project? So for us, less easy tracking actually are citations, because people still in our community do not cite data. And we know of editors that actually take data citations out of the references. So it's not a comprehensive way, but it is important because we know that citations are what counts in the scholarly record of a researcher. And what we also discovered is while we interact with the community, we get to know about reuse, but not in domains that are outside our immediate attention. So it helps us track really the broad range of reuse. But we still do this manually. It's our data curators who do full text searches at these bibliographic search engines and put them into a bibliographical database. Again, I mentioned the problems that we have here. What I wanted to specifically emphasize is the problem for the synthesis databases, because we don't have a good way yet that that users can cite the thousands of publications that go into a data set that they generate from these synthesis databases. That's a big demand from those people who have contributed to these synthesis databases. And nobody cares about EarthChem being cited in the literature, but they want their own publication that is in the synthesis to be cited. So our really big effort to track reuse is enormous community engagement. It's informal, but that's what helps us write the next proposal and give citations that we ask users to provide us with and so on. So we do a lot of outreach at conferences. We have interactions at exhibit booths, at workshops and so on. We've also started to implement something on our website for communities where specific research areas can come together and showcase their research, their data practices, and so on. We actively participate in research efforts, and this is specifically a young generation that now does data science, does machine learning on our data, that we are actually at the table and can see where the science is going and what the impact on research is. And then we also engage with editors and publishers in order to advance the whole culture of data citation. So that's another aspect here. Reuse and education is a big problem because your class exercise is not something that gets cited anywhere. So what we're doing now is running workshops with educators to generate class exercises that can be made available also through publication and can then be cited and downloaded, and we can see more of that usage. And we're starting to try, at least at conferences, have dedicated sessions for people to showcase their reuse of our systems. This always conflicts with people wanting to talk about new research that is not necessarily related to these data systems, but we're using actually a new theme in these conferences that allows people to submit a second first author abstract, and that has an impact on the whole thing. So we have a number of steps that we're going to take, or we would like to take as far as resources allow us. The complex citation was mentioned earlier with these reliquaries. It's something that we want to explore. We want to actually finally implement the use metrics on our landing pages, continue to do a lot of community engagement. The classroom exercises that I mentioned already. And then the big question, should we start implementing authentication for when people download? Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any quick questions for Kirsten? None? Okay, well, I'm the next speaker. And I'm the last speaker before we get into the discussion. So. Oh, there we go. Okay, so and my sponsors are CDAC, which is the NASA Socioeconomic Data and Application Center, the ESDIS Standards Coordination Office, and Astromat, which Kirsten runs. And I'm going to talk about scientific use and impact of socioeconomic data across disciplines. So what we've done is at CDAC, we've been operating for over 25 years, and we're just one of 12 distributed active archive centers in the NASA Earth Observing System Data and Information System. But our focus is a little different than all the other data centers in the system, in that we focus on improving understanding of human interactions in the environment. And so we're trying to develop and operate applications that support the integration of both the socioeconomic and the earth science data. So we're kind of an information gateway, if you will. And we offer open data products and services that enable diverse uses. And we're trying to get more and more diversity in terms of our users. And currently, we have about over 289 data sets within 51 data collections and over 2,000 maps. And we have various map services, viewers, et cetera, and other tools. And our data have been cited in over 6,000 publications, including over 5,000 journal articles. So in terms of finding evidence, and we've heard from others about their efforts to do this, and ours are quite similar in that we have journal articles, we have books, educational materials, and even policy documents and other gray literature that cite CDAC data. So we're out there and we search catalogs, and sometimes the DOIs are helpful when they're taken up. But we've actually done some little studies and found that the uptake of DOIs is a little slow yet. We're hoping that picks up more as time goes on, but I think that would help us all. And we also get publisher feeds, and these are periodic reports of data citations. And then we're often getting requests from publishers. They routinely ask for permission to include our data or a map in their forthcoming publication, regardless of whether the rights are obvious or not. Sometimes we have CC BY licenses, for example, on all our maps and our data, and that's quite obvious to some, but often publishers are looking for a reply to their specific request. And then sometimes user community members talk about the data being cited in a particular publication, or an author will actually tell us that the publication came out that cited our data. So we've, through the years, conducted lots of little studies to try to determine the diversity of uses of our data. So this was a study of data between 2004 and 2013. And you can see here, most of the users are in either environment and ecology or the geosciences, but also you can see we have, social sciences, the biological sciences, as well as other areas such as economics, business, plant, animal science, et cetera. So we found this really informative, and we subsequently conducted a study looking at the citations of data between 2007 and 2016. So this was a decade, and we wanted to see if there were any differences at that point. And also with this one, we're using the Web of Science subject areas. And so you see here again, environmental sciences are really big, but we also see the meteorology and atmospheric sciences, life sciences, and as well as public health, some remote sensing at that time. And you'll see later that's of particular interest to us and to NASA. And so we did another study more recently of citations of data from 2017 to 2019. And here, these are also the Web of Science discipline categories. And you see here again, the environmental sciences. So there's kind of a pattern here. But we're also seeing here some similarities from previously: meteorology, multidisciplinary studies, public environmental and occupational health, et cetera, as well as like energy and fuels. And so this is another study where we're looking at 1997 to 2021. But in this one, these are the categories of the journals with 3 or more articles that co-cite CDAC data with remote sensing data. So we're trying to look here at who the users are when our data are co-cited with remote sensing data. And so you see here, again, it's the environmental sciences that's leading the pack, if you will. But we're also seeing a diversity of other areas in here. Of course, ecology, but we see, biology, there's some remote sensing in there, multidisciplinary sciences and meteorology, and the atmospheric sciences. And then looking at the major fields that are represented within those same years, 1997 to 2021, we can see that, of course, environment and ecology and geosciences are leading the pack here, but social sciences, multidisciplinary, and biology and biochemistry are they're moving up. And then we had a study that we're currently conducting. This is just looking at 2021 and 2022 articles. So our user working group asked us, who are your current users today? Which is different than a lot of these other studies where we looked at trends over time. And here we want to be able to say today, these are the groups that are using our data. And this way, we can identify what we should be doing today to help these users. So again, you see the environmental sciences, they're up there in meteorology and multidisciplinary sciences as well. But you can also see planning and development, public, environmental and occupational health, economics, energy and fuels, and ecology, as well as geography and medicine in there. So this is informative, and knowing that these are our users who are citing our data, this is the scientific impact of our data. It tells us that we can try to serve these users more, as well as trying to get more of these others that are less represented here, but we certainly want to increase their use as well. And with that, I want to thank you very much for your attention. So now we're going to hand over the floor to Devin, who's going to lead our discussion session.
Bob, can I ask you a question just quickly on your
Yes,
comment?
Mark. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, great research. Interesting stuff. Just a question about your methodology. When you say citation, do you mean really specific formal citation and use of a DOI, or are you looking more broadly? And then also, how do you determine remote sensing data? Then it's very broad.
Yes, so for the first question regarding the DOI, looking at the use of DOIs to cite our data, that's only really happened since like 2014. And before then, we just have the references. What we've been doing is, besides getting those feeds we talked about from various sources, our searches have looked for specific terms that might indicate that our data have been used. So we search for things like CDAC, season, and then often names of some of our very popular data sets like our flagship data collections, GPW. So sometimes they're not in the reference section, but if they've explicitly stated our data product to a point where we know which data product we're talking about, we count it as a citation. And then on your second question is how we determine or define remote sensing data. We're not just looking at NASA remote sensing data, we're looking at any kind of remote sensing data. And so often when we're reviewing what we did get in the feeds, we're looking for terms like satellite or remote sensing, or sometimes people will refer to a specific satellite or an instrument. So you might be talking about MODIS or VIIRS or something like that. But we're also, when we're searching for our data, use of our data sets, once we get down to looking at the full text of the article, then we're doing those fine-tuned searches as well. We like to verify that our data actually have been cited. And when we're doing that, we're looking also to see, whether satellite data have been cited or not. Currently, where we are, if it's obvious which instrument was used, which satellite instrument was used, we are making a note of that in our bibliographic database. But often, and that's actually part of our current study, the specificity isn't as much as we would like in those. And part of our current study is we're looking at, for instance, whether it's the citation is of the data set or the documentation, or they're just mentioning an instrument, or they're just saying, we got the data from NASA, which sometimes is the case. So this current study, we're finding it has a wealth of information, but I should tell you, for that current 21-22 study, we only, because there's so many articles now, more and more people are writing articles, and we don't have a big team that's doing this. So what we did is we randomly selected 75 articles from those 2 years because we actually had to read them. And so our study team got into it, but we're still conducting that study to get more details. But thank you for your questions. Take it away, Deb.
Let me find the slide where you have the questions. We can get the slide deck back up.
The intro slide deck, can we have that up again, please? It's the very last slide.
Okay. While that's happening, I'm Devin Ray Donaldson. I'm one of the co-chairs of Repository Platforms for Research Data, IG. And I'm also associate professor of the Department of Information and Library Science at the Luddy School of Informatics, Computing, and Engineering, and I teach courses on digital curation. So I'm really interested in this from the perspective of graduate education, where I have modules in the digital curation course centering on repositories and wanting to help information professionals that work in libraries or other information and organizational contexts understand how to support users and how to track their use. So let me back to the beginning. Probably got to go all the way back. Okay. The intro slide deck, please. So I'm having. All right. So Bob had asked us to think about at the beginning these questions. So I thought I'd bring them back up here so you didn't have to reserve them to memory. But maybe before that, if there were people that had questions as the presenters gave their presentations that you didn't get a chance to ask earlier, please go to the microphone nearest you so we can hear your question. Please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Anne Cambon-Thompson. I'm from CNRS in France and working in the domain of health data. I have two questions. One is in the domain of health data, there are more and more synthetic data that are created from the metadata and from the use because of the sensitivity. So I was wondering if any of your experiences, you have the example of synthetic set of data that are deposited and then cited and used as such. That's the first question.
Okay.
And but just, I don't know if you have answered
Yeah.
that.
So for any of our panelists who might have had experience with those?
To some degree, I think this is similar to the synthesis databases that I was talking about, right? So you actually have data that was originally published and has their own citation record, so to say. But then when it becomes part of this large data lake, there is a usage that is another step removed from the original data. And it's, I think, really hard to get a good solution. I've been looking at this it's a working group, right, on the complex citation in RDA to really see if this approach of building reliquaries or these compilations or collections of citations will do anything. So far in my community, at least, the original producers of the data want to see their paper listed in the references of the publication, and being in some kind of invisible reliquary would not satisfy them. So I still see this as a major challenge. There was an earlier presentation today that Kirsten Elger showed. I don't know how many of the audience were in that session that was in this room this morning. And she showed how they're starting to implement at their repository a lot of original citations on landing pages, because that's the only way I think you can do it, because the printed article or digitally printed article will not accommodate that.
And then I have my second question very quickly,
Okay.
which is more and more you see editors and publishers that limit the number of citations. So I was wondering if any of you has the possibility to analyze how these policies influence the way data are cited or not cited.
I mean, I'm just going to, I didn't want to take that, but this is, I think I mentioned that many times we hear from authors that the publisher has told them to take the data citation out of the references to reduce the number of references. So unless we're really convincing the publishers that citations need to be handled in a different manner in special, which I think is possible because it's online, it's digital, you know, we can have different types of references. They don't need to be in the paper itself. It's unsatisfactory right now.
Maybe a footnote, if not, if they're so stringent about that, some way to get this information in there.
Yes. and
I,
you-
okay,
Sorry, go
no, go ahead. No, I just recently, so more and more people in Design Safe are compiling, so they call them databases, and they're compiling numbers. And for best practices, we want them to put the sources of each of these numbers. And one of our users was very, very upset about what the publisher was telling them. So they fought, and they were able to add an addendum that was not in the digital landing page of the article, but was added to the physical publication. So that was that. But we have to think, and I think this, and I tell this to my users, and of course I get the same reaction as Kirsten. So we are in an open science, and we are supposed to give away our data, and data doesn't have, at least in the US, data points intellectual property. So the idea would be that people share these numbers without the expectation of a citation. I mean, that's one idea. I'm just throwing these to you, floating idea. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, for instance, in my own case, my journal subscriptions are no longer received in print. I just get my journals delivered to me digitally for those that I subscribe to, and those that I'm trying to read. I'm not going to the library to look in the stacks, to look for the printed paper. I'm only interested in what I can see digitally. I'm sorry, but that's my bias now. And I guess I've adopted that over the last couple decades or so. And so if we're, going to a state where people are becoming more digitally inclined in terms of their reading, I'm not sure that we should be trying to work within the printed paradigm, that is the page limitations that were the previous mode of publishers, but apparently still being exercised by some. So I think we need to try to encourage publishers to move on.
Were there any other questions from the audience?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that. So Kirsten, you founded and lead COPDES, the Coalition of Publishers, Data something.
The Coalition for Publishing Data in the Earth and Space Sciences.
There you go, thank you. So the journals that your authors publish in aren't members of that?
It's not a membership organization.
Well,
COPDES is more of a, basically a discussion forum, bringing the publishers together with the repositories to have an ongoing dialogue. So we have, this discussion led to, for example, the project of enabling fair data that AGU ran. That was what actually drove more of the developments, but COPDES kind of just fosters the dialogue between the publishers and the repositories to bring up problems, challenges on either side. So, it's.
Yeah, I guess just what I'm getting at is that there just seems to be a really wide disparity here in different journals. AGU now requires data citation. They're not pulling out citations. I mean, pulling out citations, I'm sorry, that's just garbage. So I'm just surprised, I don't know. I'm just surprised that the geochemistry journals aren't on the same page. You have thoughts on why that is?
I can add to that what we found is that many publishers are very protective of their editors and reviewers because they know they're doing a voluntary job. And so enforcing new data policies that the publishers put up or that they agree on is, you know, a very sensitive issue. So that's why we actually, within Cogdis and specifically in the geochemistry community, moved from talking to the publishers to talking to the editors and the reviewers and really bringing them on board and telling them how much the repositories can actually help them to do the review and to ensure proper citation and all this part that matters to us and is a burden for the reviewers and the editors. So that's one approach.
We have another question.
Yes, hi, I'm Jin from TU Delft Library in the Netherlands. I have a question about the French Open Science Monitor. I'm not Dutch, but the repository I develop and maintain is for all the Dutch technical universities. So when they publish their data sets, most of the data sets come to our repository. And I actually wanted to monitor just like the French Open Science Monitor, but it was just a plan in my head. So I was wondering if you could, or if you had some plan to expand your service beyond France to all other European countries. I saw the source code is available on GitHub, but unfortunately, it is written in French.
What?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it depends on the tools, but normally they are not written in French. It's bad. I'm going to yell. But okay. So there are different efforts right now to try to develop indeed the monitor to other countries. So there were a couple of European countries that were interested. So we are exploring this effort. But you have to see that it's really starting from the publication and goes to the data sets. So we are not starting from a particular repository and then monitor the usage of data sets from a particular repository, because we identify mentions of data sets. But what we are not doing right now, we are not disambiguating the mentions of the data set to see if it's the same data set that is mentioned. So we just have mentions, but we are not at the level of a citation. On the other end, for software, yes, we are doing that. We are starting to disambiguate software so that we know that it's the same software that is mentioned in many papers. And for dataset, I think it's more challenging because a lot of datasets are not named. So we rely on PID, on link to the repositories, and they are not always there. But it's an effort that we would like to explore, yes. So independently from the fact that we would like also to extend to other countries.
Okay, does it mean manual jobs are also required to evaluate and monitor and to plot the data? I mean, I wanted to know how much automated to plot the graphs and charts on the website.
It depends on the task you are interested in. So if you're particularly interested in one repository, I don't think it's at this level right now. But if you are interested in monitoring and following the evolution of datasets mentions in a set of papers at the level of a university, it might be doable, like without too many efforts. Mm-hmm. And if you're interested, you can contact me. I will put you in contact with the people who are working more on the evolution and outreach of these tools.
Okay, thank you.
I actually have a question for Elizabeth. I know you said in your presentation that data analysis was like one of the primary data uses that you all are tracking. Do you think that over time, even though as you were doing your analysis, you were able to see that there were different uses being put to the data, do you think over time you might expand your tracking of different uses? Yeah.
Hi, yes, I think, oh, I'm echoing quite a bit. We would love to be able to do this in a less curated manner. In other words, more automated, and something that would come in on a DOI query from in an API perhaps, and that we could associate with the studies that are associated with the DOI and perhaps let our users determine, we could tell them this is an uncurated selection of things that have come to us, but that they might want to see as well. We also have I didn't talk about this, but we have a self-deposit archive, open ICPSR, where people cite that all the time, but that's not what, we are particularly paid to do. We do the curated collection. So it'd be great to be able to start getting those coming in as well to get a good handle on how often that self-curated data is being used. So I think, yes, we're very much considering options.
Okay, great. Maybe we can go back to the slide we had. Yes. So in the final moments that we have left, perhaps we could think about how we can improve upon the incentives and recognition for stakeholders who contribute to the data sharing ecosystem, or if there's a particular comment that any of our presenters have. I think that as they went through the presentations, we addressed facets of these questions. So I was wondering if either the last one or the first one, if you have a particular comment that you'd like to add. We definitely addressed the first one, and we could see the various ways that
Just a comment that was very, very well taken by our community. So we recently worked on search engine optimization in order to have Google profiles harvest our citations, and the users were so, the professors or researchers were so happy to see that citations of their data sets from Design Safe were making their, Google Scholar profile up. They show these for their tenure track or for their promotion, and they don't care if it's a paper or they put a lot of effort in the data set publication, and they really loved seeing the citation as part of their Google Scholar profile. That was a big hit for us, a big hit for the community, a big stimulus. I don't know.
I just want to add that until the committees, the promotion committees, the hiring committees, the funding panels start to recognize the value of the sharing of data. And sharing of data is not just a simple thing. It's not just collecting the data. It's making it usable and providing it through a license that enables use. That these are valuable contributions. And then furthermore, to have the data cited shows that they are valuable scientific contributions. But if the these committees aren't recognizing the data itself and the value of the data citations, then we have a big fight ahead of us yet. But I think that we can slowly, as the culture of open science changes, we can slowly help them to understand the value of data and therefore the value of data citations.
Well, we are at time. We certainly want to thank you for coming to this session. I think we've learned a lot from the presenters about the different ways in which data are being used across these repositories, and in turn, the different types of impacts that the data are having in the various communities that are being represented by our presenters. So we want to certainly thank you for presenting and sharing. And hopefully, if you had additional questions or wonderings that crop up in your mind after this session, please feel free to reach out to our presenters who have done wonderful work. Hopefully they'll be able to share more and answer any questions that you might have at that point. Thank you very much.